Welcome to the Advance Your Art podcast, where we talk about the journey from artist to entrepreneur and everything in between. You've worked hard to hone your craft. Now take it to the next level with tips, techniques, strategies, and routines used by successful artists to grow their businesses and careers. Now, let's get started and have some fun with your host, Yuri Cataldo.
Good morning, Shayna. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Of course, it's my pleasure. Thank you for taking time to chat with me. So for my listeners who are not familiar with your work or your store, how do you describe yourself and what you do?
So I first would describe myself, I guess, as a few different titles. Letterpress printer would be number one.
Mm-hmm.
Number two would be I run a stationery business. And number three is I have a brick and mortar gift shop. So we print in-house letterpress greeting cards, letterpress printed greeting cards that we ship to stores all over the country. And then at our flagship retail shop, we have our cards there, and then another like assorted gift items under $50.
Okay, well, very cool. Okay, so I do want to get into your shop.
Mm-hmm.
Before we go down that route, I want to ask you about your background. So what first made you interested in studying art?
I was in high school, and it was the only thing that I really felt passionate about, to be honest. Like I kind of was an angsty child,
Mm-hmm.
and the only place I really felt free and that I could express myself and my feelings and, whatever was going on in high school, through art. So I took all advanced art classes in high school. And then out of high school, I was like, well, I guess I'll go to art school just because I was 18 and I didn't really know what else I wanted to do. So I was like,
Sure.
I guess I'll do that. And I went to school for painting, to be a painting major. And because I had really enjoyed my drawing classes, but painting is just a totally different medium. So after a few years in art school, which is also totally different than, be it like just kind of playing around and like drawing and stuff, it became very much more like academicized for me, which kind of took a lot of the joy out of it. So I ended up taking some time off, and like moving to LA and being a waitress and working in an art supply store. And then kind of realized there was nowhere else to go. So I decided to go back to art school. But when I went back, it was for interdisciplinary art, which was much more what I was interested in. Rather than studying a specific medium, I was interested in kind of telling a story through whatever I had at my disposal.
Okay. So for that one, so you went to the San Francisco Art Institute. What was it like being an artist in San Francisco in the early 2000s?
So being an artist, I went to art school, and then I kind of had fun with my friends who are not art artists, or like we didn't go to school together.
Yeah.
So I could tell you what it was like to be a 20-something in San Francisco.
Sure, that works too.
In the early 2000s, everything was relatively affordable. Everybody goes out all the time. You're 20 years old. You're exploring life. It's very like beatnik kind of free living. And then on the side, I mean, not on the side, but I went there for art school, but I kind of like living my life and like making art were kind of two different worlds a little bit, but they definitely went hand in hand. But I don't know that if my art making experience was specifically tied to San Francisco, kind of more my life kind of, free love experience was not like specifically like that, but just kind of like, just not adhering to many rules.
Yeah, that's great. Well, so it's interesting. I mean, I now travel to San Francisco a lot for the company I work for, and it's I'm curious to see how it's different from when it was in the early 2000s and even before that. I know that because of the tech money has come in and kind of gentrified a lot of things and made a lot of the the areas less, I'm saying, interesting than they were before.
Yeah. Yeah, like when I was there, when I moved there in 2003, it was right after the first dot-com bubble had burst. So people
Hmm.
were just like fleeing the city in droves because they didn't have any money.
Yeah.
So now where it's like people are fighting for apartments and overbidding, and if there's an open house, like 100 people like come in, and people like be like, I can spend $500 more than you're asking. When I was there, everybody was lowering their rents and like
Yeah.
working deals out and like making deals with their landlords. So I mean, I wouldn't say my place was super affordable, but it definitely
Hmm.
was not what it was like now. And I feel like there's just a lot of like youthful energy there, and it's a very close kind of city where everything's in proximity of each other. So it kind
Yeah.
of felt like a really big dorm room
Yeah.
where like your friends live across the street and around the corner, and everyone's at the same bar, and it's just makes it easy to be social a lot.
Yeah. So what did you do after you graduated, and how did Chicago come into play with your journey?
So when I graduated, I actually got an internship at Women's Studio Workshop, which is in upstate New York, which is where I did book and paper art. And I was there for 6 months. And then between that, like my graduation time and coming, I went back to San Francisco. I also like traveled around Southeast Asia. I was in New Orleans volunteering after Katrina. I did a
Hmm.
bunch of things. I moved back to San Francisco for a year. And then when I was there, I decided to apply for grad school in Chicago.
Okay.
So I did a bunch of things in between, but then I moved back from San Francisco to Chicago in 2008.
Okay. So in Chicago then, so you went to Columbia College, and what made you decide that book painting and paper art was where you wanted to start focusing on?
So when I was at San Francisco Art Institute, one of my interdisciplinary classes had been a bookmaking class, and I
Hmm.
really just enjoyed how words and images went together, and then also the idea of like sequentiality and like having pages turn and it being an interactive kind of more immersive experience rather than something that you just kind of look at it and interpret. So that was where I first started thinking about it. And then when I went to Women's Studio Workshop, I kind of continued that. It was a book arts center. And then from there, that was when I was like, I want to do this, but I want to spend some time in between. So there's only a few book art grad programs in the United States. And actually the University of the Arts in Philadelphia was where I had originally wanted to go, but I was waitlisted and never got out the waitlist. So I ended up in Chicago. I had also gotten into school in Iowa, at the University of Iowa, the grad program there.
Hmm.
But I had my boyfriend with me, and he was not about to move from San Francisco to Iowa. So, so we chose Chicago, which
Sure.
was still great. I mean, I'm glad. I think my life would have gone totally different if I had, decided to, if I had gotten into Philadelphia, this University of the Arts in Philadelphia, or if I had decided to go to University of Iowa instead of Columbia College in Chicago.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Great. Okay. So tell me about Steel Petal Press. And I'm most interested in the beginning. Why did you decide to start this company? And I'm going to guess that throughout your art training that there wasn't a lot of business school types of or business management kind of classes you took. So what did you do to learn how to start and run a company?
So when I started it, it was the why was just I was living in Chicago. I'd only been there for 3 months, and
Hmm.
I didn't know anybody. Or most of my friends lived all other places around the country because I lived so many places. So I just wanted to make greeting cards to send to my friends and family. Like that was why it started. It wasn't
Okay.
even I'm going to sell them. It was just utilitarian purposes.
Hmm.
So, and also when I had gone to school and I was like, well, I'm going to school for a, interdisciplinary book and paper art MFA. It's kind of like, I don't know what I'm going to do after this, but I know that there are people who sell letterpress greeting cards. So I knew that that was an option. It
Hmm.
wasn't my end goal, but it was one of the paths I could take.
Yeah.
So, so I made cards, and I ended up, having some left over. And then there's a little boutique in my neighborhood that sells, that sells items that are made in Chicago, and it's only consignment. It's only made in Chicago. It's for emerging artists.
Mm-hmm.
So I went there with some of my leftover cards and and they sold them, and then we're like, oh, you should, print more and bring more to us. And at that point I was still in school and was like, oh, I don't have any extra time to do that. So I kind of just didn't think twice about it. And then after 1 year at Columbia College, I decided not to continue with my degree, just because getting an MFA was not ultimately going to be, taking me towards the goals that I was interested in. Or I guess I didn't have any specific goals, but I just knew that the academic art world was not for me. So it wasn't the path I needed to go down anymore.
Yeah.
So at that point, I ended up having, I started a community garden and did some kind of more interactive art pieces. And then, just planned a wedding and got married and was like, I have this skill. I want to do something with it. Maybe I'll try printing more cards. But it was very kind of haphazard. I kind of stumbled upon it. There was no business plan. I didn't necessarily want to do it. I didn't want to do it. I wasn't specifically going towards that goal. So I think at some point I was just like, well, I'm kind of doing this a little bit on the side. I'm going to give it 6 months and see if it works. And if it does, I'll just keep doing it. And that's kind of where it started. But I always had if this ever stops working, I'll just figure something else out.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it started. And then I just kept working. So I just kept doing it.
Great. Okay. So when was the moment where you realized that this is what I want to do, this is working, and I'm now going to set up a physical location to house my company?
So I always needed a physical location because I had a press.
Mm-hmm.
So the first 6 months I was taking 2 buses all the way up to Evanston, which is 16 miles away, and hour and a half, and pulling my rolly suitcase full of paper to print. And at some point I was like, okay, this is getting ridiculous and not worth my time. I should buy a press. And then as soon as I needed to buy a press, I needed somewhere to put it. So kind of almost immediately, within 6 months.
Okay.
But it was lucky for me because a friend of mine it was a painter and had, was willing to rent out half of her, a painter part of her studio, which was just 100 square feet for $100 that I could even then I was like, I will buy this press. I will put this here. And it's still no skin off my back. It's $100 a month, which isn't cheap, but it still is not the commitment of rent that I have currently.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about that part then. So how did this evolve so that you went from a press, renting a space with an artist, and then to actually having a physical retail shop and 3 employees?
Yeah, 6 employees.
Sorry, 6 employees.
So let's see. So when I moved into the space with her, that was 2011. And in between that space and where I am now currently, I had 2 different spaces because I kept kind of outgrowing where I was. So the last place I was at before my current retail shop, I was in 500 square feet, and I had 1 employee and 1 intern, and I was there for, I want to say 3 or 4 years. And then when I went to my first trade show, that was when I went from, kind of doing wedding invitations and kind of selling a little wholesale to you just have to start stockpiling up more inventory.
Yeah.
And I got Paper Source as an account, which they'll order, 1,000 to 5,000 cards at a time, and it just takes up a lot of space. So I knew I was growing out of that space. That was the 3rd space that I was in. And I kind of was like, I would like to be in a storefront. I would like to be more connected to Chicago as a community. I feel like not that they need to know who I am, but I just have no street front presence. I was on the 3rd floor of this,